Although the Prophet Muhammad, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, was given such access, he was not hungry for it. The desire for such knowledge is an obstacle to the one who desires direct knowledge of Allah. The evidence in the phenomenal world, far is the world which is apprehended by the senses, however, that this recover has raken and is taking place is to be found by observing the manner in which the social and cultural conditions in our world have changed, especially in this century, and by examining how life is conducted today. In or her words, it is possible to ascertain the characteristics of Dajjal as an unseen force by examining Dajjal as a worldwide social and cultural phenomenon. Considering Dajjal as a worldwide social and cultural phenomenon, we see that the takeover is well underway, and that the time would appear to be soon approaching when it will be time for Dajjal, the individual, to appear, simply because the systems and the people running those systems, that is the kafir system, that is the Dajjal system, have apparently gained sufficient worldwide control to be able to install him as the leader they have all been waiting for. Once he has been recognized and acclaimed as such, dramatic changes have taken place on the face of this earth in the last 100 years. The social groupings which used to be prevalent throughout the world, most of them based on the village pattern, a community of families who all knew and helped each other, and which interacted with other village communities, have been rapidly eroded and depersonalized. In the large cities of today, the individual has become increasingly alienated from his or herself, and from others, and from knowledge of Allah. A cog in the consumer-producer process who, when not at work or asleep, is often trapped in an infantile and unfulfilled search for illusory self-gratification, which ensures that there is usually very little me left to reflect and consider where he or she is going, and no time to actually do something about breaking out of the recurring behavior pattern in which he or she is trapped. Even where the social grouping of today is limited in size to the village number, the actual social transaction between its members is far less intimate and cohesive than in the past. There is less time to meet together and more time to watch television. There is less time spent working together and more time spent working alone. For those who have been born into the state of affairs, this change in social conditions is not always apparent. It is assumed that things have always been the way they are, as for example, like in the movie Thanks 1138. Perhaps the only way of appreciating how dramatic the change has been is to observe what happens when a multinational corporation decides to exploit the natural resources of a hitherto inaccessible region of the world. In a relatively brief period of time, the activities of the people controlling the corporation have not only disrupted the way of life of the people living in that area, but have also eliminated their traditional sources of livelihood, and thereby ensured that there is cheap labor available to carry out the work being generated by the corporation activities. Suddenly, everyone has a number and wants this thing called money, and the social harmony which existed before the mine, or the oil field, or the timber felling operation, or the factory assembly plant, or the hydroelectric power scheme, or whatever became a reality, is gone. All this is done in the name of progress, and civilizing the backward, and improving the quality of life, but in reality, the new lifestyle, which is inevitably linked with the new technology, and with the mockery of real knowledge which the kafir calls literacy and education, is the sign of the erosion or end of a truly human transaction in that area, as those who cannot be utilized are either deliberately driven away or eliminated by the introduction of new illnesses and viruses to which they have no natural resistance. Another significant change in social activity, which is clearly linked with the degree of automation in any particular social grouping, is that whereas in the past a community used to be united by its worship of God, nowadays, this basic and unifying element is often lacking in people's lives. In the Western world, this pattern of worship used to be predominantly that of the Christian religion, a peculiar amalgam of Paul's own ideas, Greek philosophy, the innovations of a priesthood, which itself was an innovation, in its attempts to compromise by all means with Kafir rulers, and finally a few races of the original teachings of the Prophet Jesus, peace be on him. Since this pattern of worship was not, and is not the same as that which was originally embodied by Jesus and his followers, it follows that it did not, and cannot, and never will, affirm the true nature of existence, or lead to direct knowledge of Allah. It was, and is accordingly inevitable, that people would constantly abandon this pattern of worship the kafir, because he or she had no desire to worship Allah in the first place. And the true believer, because he or she realized that the brand of Christianity, which was being advertised, had little to do with the original teachings of Jesus, and was not based on the behavioral pattern of him and his community, and would not lead to knowledge of Allah. It was the fragmentation of Western society by the advent of the mechanized way of life, the so-called Industrial Revolution, which made it easier for people to break free of the Christian pattern of worship. No worship was preferable to a pattern of worship which, although performed in the name of Jesus, did not conform to the pattern of worship which Jesus had in fact brought, and which has in fact been long lost forever. It is interesting to note that there are some writers who have equate the official Trinitarian Church, in all its different manifestations, with the Antichrist. Since so many of its basic doctrines are nor only invented by man, but also openly contradict what Jesus himself taught, may the peace of Allah be on him. And since so many of its rituals derive from sources other than the lifestyle of Jesus and his community, this view is reinforced by the fact that it was the champions of the official Trinitarian Church, both Roman Catholic and then also Protestant, who in past centuries waged war on and eliminated all those Unitarian Christians, including the Nazarenes, the Ebionites, the Donatists, the Arians, the Adoptionists, the Paulicians, the Alumnists, the Cathari, and many of the Goths who sought to follow the original reaching of Jesus and the way of life embodied by him. Once the last of these Unitarian Christians had been eliminated by the medieval Inquisition and its successor, the Spanish Inquisition, along with a great many of the Unitarian Jews living in Europe, the official Trinitarian Church then concentrated on attempting to eliminate all the Unitarian followers of the Prophet Muhammad, the Muslims, and despite its lack of success in this project, continues in these attempts even today. The degree of success which was achieved by the official Trinitarian Church in these attempts, both in the past and in the present, was, and is, only made possible by the fact that it has always worked hand in glove with the kafir system. That is the Dajjal system, which of course was, and is, also committed to subverting and destroying the practice of a living and dynamic Islam. In the light of this, it is clear that any apparent conflict between science and Trinitarian Christianity is largely illusory, and certainly only skin deep, since they both depend on and support the same system. However, it is equally clear that a distinction must be drawn between those Trinitarian Christians who are perfectly well aware that the way they follow is not the way of Jesus, and those people who in all sincerity wish to worship God, and who have been misled into believing that the brand of Christianity which they follow is synonymous with what Jesus originally taught, and who up to now have had no chance of access to the living life transaction of Islam, which is the prophetic lifestyle for this age, and which naturally bears a striking resemblance to the lifestyle once embodied by Jesus and his original followers. May Allah be pleased with them. What has just been said about the Christians also applies to the Jews. Many of those who today call themselves Jews clearly do not follow the way of Moses. May the peace of Allah be on him, and indeed a great number of them do not even claim to be descended from the original tribe of Israel, for whom both Moses and Jesus were specifically sent, but freely admit that they are descended from other forebears. Perhaps one of the most significant origins of these non-Jewish Jews is the people known as the Khazars, who were originally a small nation living in what is now Turkey and southern Russia, in the area between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Their leader, King Joseph, adopted Judaism out of political expediency during the 8th century AD. so as to avoid being conquered either by the Christians who were approaching his kingdom from the north, or by the Muslims who were coming up from the south. He was perfectly well aware that this move would ensure a limited protection from those who also worshipped God. The descendants of the Khazars, who are usually referred to as the Ashkenazim, noted for their ability and expertise both in the arts and in their business and financial transactions, are now spread throughout the earth. The way of life which they follow is not the way of life which Moses and his community followed. May Allah be pleased with them. That way of life had already been lost when Jesus first appeared on earth. Jesus, it will be remembered, came to re-establish the way of Moses amongst the tribe of Israel, and not to change it, one jot or title. The fact that the scribes and Pharisees, the self-appointed priesthood of what had become the Jewish religion, did not even recognize who Jesus was, shows how far astray they were from the original way of Moses. Even then, and that was 20 centuries ago. Sometimes described as the 13th tribe of Israel, the descendants of the Khazars are linked by some historians with one of the last four major signs of the end of the world. That is the appearance of Yajuj wa Majuj, or Gog and Magog, since they are in reality Jews, but not Jews, and since King Joseph confirmed, in about 960 AD in the famous Khazar correspondence between himself and Hasdai ibn Shaprat, the Sephardic Jewish foreign minister of the Andalusian Caliph Abdur Rahman III, that the Khazars are descended from Togarma, the grandson of Japheth, son of Noah, and according to Genesis Lo2-3, the uncle of Togarma was Magog. If this be true, then we see that they are intimately linked with reappearance of the Dajjal, since many of them today are in high positions of control in the various interlinking systems which together make up the Kafir system, that is, the Dajjal system. There are those who are only too eager to point out that what has been said about the Christians and the Jews also applies to the Muslims, and that there are many people alive today who call themselves Muslims, but who are not following the way of the Prophet Muhammad and his community. This is quite true, and it is partially a measure of the success enjoyed by the Christians and the Jews in their attempts to subvert and destroy those who have sought or who seek to follow the way of Muhammad and his community. May the blessings and peace of Allah be on him and them. One of the chief methods used by the Kafir system, that is the Dajjal system, to erase living Islam is to introduce the Kafir way of life into the Muslim countries, whilst disguising this ploy by describing it in Islamic terminology. Nearly all the traditional Muslim lands are today controlled and governed in accordance with the precepts of the Kafir system, and not according to what is in the Quran and the Sunnah. Although the Prophet Muhammad, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, said that some Muslims would follow the example of their predecessors, meaning the Christians, and the Jews like a lizard making for its hole, he also said that not all of his community would go astray. There are still many Muslims who today follow the same pattern of life as that which was followed by the Prophet Muhammad and the first Muslim community which formed around him. The point is that although there are people who say they are Muslims, but who do not follow the way of Muhammad, at least the way of Muhammad is still available for those who do wish to follow it, and at least there are people who still do follow it. The main difference between the Jews, the Christians and the Muslims is that the Jews no longer know or do the prayer which Moses did. The Christians no longer know or do the prayer which Jesus did, and the Muslims still know and do the prayer which Muhammad did. The way of Moses and the way of Jesus have been lost. The religions of Judaism and Christianity have been developed and introduced instead. These religions are an integral part of the Kafir system, that is, the Dajjal system. The Dajjal system is the complete antithesis of the prophetic way of life, as embodied not only by Moses, Jesus and Muhammad, but also by all the prophets as far back as Adam. May the blessings and peace of Allah be on all 124,000 of them. There are three basic patterns of social grouping in the world. There is the simple community which lives in fitra, that is, in simple harmony with existence, but without following the prophetic pattern of worship of Allah. There is the Muslim community which, as well as living in harmony with existence, also worships Allah in the manner indicated by Allah through the Prophet Muhammad. May Allah bless him and grant him peace. Finally, there is the Kafir society, which neither lives in harmony with existence, nor consciously worships Allah. In reality, of course, every single atom is in its place, and the overall harmony of existence eloquently proclaims the majesty and beauty of the bringer into existence, and the bringer out of existence, and the only existent, Allah. We have seen how the pattern of life followed by the small community living in Fitra and by the Muslim community has been considerably eroded and destroyed, especially in the last century, by the spread of the Kafir system, that is, the Dajjal system. In order to appreciate the characteristics of this system, which is outwardly the expression of Dajjal as a worldwide social and cultural phenomenon, and inwardly the manifestation of Dajjal as an unseen force, it is necessary to examine the system in greater detail. The way in which today's Kafir state is managed and controlled is by means of a highly centralized and increasingly computerized government. The advance of technology, especially in the realms of communication and travel, together with the use of complex computerized information storage and retrieval systems, has made widespread control from one place a reality. Most Kafir states are police states. Compared with the situation 100 years ago, the degree of surveillance and control exercised by the rulers over the ruled is staggering. Much of this control is made possible by the form which work takes in today's industrial society. It is significant that the most common form of business concern today is the large corporation, whether privately or state-owned, which often not only has branches all over any one particular country, but also all over any one particular landmass, and even all over the world. Everyone who works within a particular corporation structure is controlled by the manner in which that corporation operates. People are increasingly obliged to put the rules of the corporation above the application of common sense and humanity in the conduct of their everyday lives. Even the individual concern or the small business is highly regulated in what it may or may not do. Everyone is always told that these rules are for their own good, but they are never given the chance to see what life would be like without them. It comes as no surprise to find that those who control the government of a Kafir state usually control the large corporations too. The elite of the Kafir controllers control the Kafir legal system, which is used to control all the other interlinking subsystems in the Kafir system. That is the Dajjal system, by determining what form they may take, and what the people who work within them may or must not do. This means that life in a Kafir state is highly institutionalized, standardized, and regularized. The most common social grouping today is centered around the work nexus. It is pyramidical in form. The manner of its control is pharaonic. This enables the few to enslave and control the many, often without the many realizing just how great the degree of control being exercised over them is. All Kafir institutions are run as a business concern, whether it be the legal system, the government system, the factory system, the university system, the hospital system, or the media system, to name but a few. These institutions are geared to enable the effective running of the producer-consumer process, which is today's predominant religion, enthralling many with its myriad rules, and controlled by its priesthood of experts. The consumer-producer process is promoted as the ideal way of life by all those who at present control the Kafir states of the so-called modern world. This is not surprising, since it is they who benefit most from that process and gather most of its financial rewards. When establishing the consumer-producer process in what is called the Third World or the underdeveloped countries, the colonizers, as has already been noted, have always disrupted the way of life, which was being followed by the indigenous population prior to the colonizers' arrival. The basic approach has always been to persuade people to produce more than they need. To do this, they have to be persuaded to work longer hours than before, and the women have to be persuaded that they will be free if they go and work in the factory all day. In order to make the work an attractive proposition, the people are offered money, but only enough to ensure that once they are dependent on it, they will have to keep on working to have it.